To order. Yeah, it is 4 o'clock on the dot. Ms. Shackelford, will you please conduct a roll call of committee members?
I will. Supervisor Malik?
Yes.
Supervisor Galloway?
Present.
Councillor Snook is not present yet. Councillor Kingston?
Yes.
Mr. Nelson?
Present.
Ms. Laundrie?
Here.
Mr. Reek? Mr. Williams? Ms. Monteith?
Here.
Mr. Wagner?
Here.
Mr. Miner? Mr. Koenig? Mr. Condor?
Here.
And Ms. Jacobs is at the Economic Development Institute right now and hopes to join us later in the meeting virtually.
Excellent, thank you. So are there any members of the public present who would like to provide comment? There's a limit of 3 minutes per speaker. I think we can, sir, please come on up, state your name and tell us where you live.
Is he coming up?
Say it in a few times.
Hi, my name is Paul Grady. I live just outside of Crozet. For the first smart scale round of projects, this area's project was the widening of the 250 bypass from 4 to 6 lanes from Emmett Street South and the replacement of the 4 bridges, Old Abbey Road, the CSX Railroad Bridge, and the 2 Route 250 bridges. The project did not get funded. What occurred to me was that about 25% of the traffic either got on or got off at the Route 250 interchange, which meant that only 75% of the traffic actually went under the bridges. That means that the bridges don't need replacement yet, but the 250 bypass still needs to be 6 lanes. Before UVA built Leonard Sandridge Road, I spoke before the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors and said that the exit ramp of Old Abbey Road and the entrance ramp of Leonard Sandridge Road should be connected, and similarly, its exit ramp should be connected to the entrance ramp of Barracks Road interchange. That didn't happen. Every time I come off the Old Abbey Road exit ramp and have to merge into 2-lane traffic only to turn off seconds later, I curse. After 5 years, about 5 years ago, I attended a lecture by the UVA architect, Alice Rauscher, and one of the things that she said was that UVA would really like to have an interchange at Leonard Sandridge Road with the 250 bypass, but that they could not afford to pay for it. I trust that UVA would still like to have that interchange, and that it would make for a good revenue sharing project between UVA, Albemarle County, and VDOT. It would take traffic off other interchanges and might even extend the life even farther of those 4 bridges crossing the 250 bypass. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else present who would like to speak? Okay. Do we see online speakers? Is there anyone online who would like to offer a comment, public comment? I don't see anyone. Okay, so we'll close the public comment period. Then we're going to do a quick introduction. Mr. Daniel Wagner, it's nice to have you here. Can you say a little bit about yourself and your role with DRPT?
Sure, thank you. My name is Daniel Wagner, everyone. I am a native Richmonder, but also have plenty of family in the Charlottesville area. And I have recently been assigned to represent DRPT on MPO, technical advisory board policies. So happy to be here. Thanks so much.
How long have you been with DRPT?
About 2 years now.
Okay.
So I'm in the planning team, so most of my work is helping our transit agencies with their long-range planning processes, as well as preparing for any FTA discretionary grants, as well as potential smart scale opportunities or any of our discretionary programs as well for new pilot projects or also just basic state of repair projects.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Walter. Right, so we on council, city council, and I had a meeting at 6. So we're hoping to be done here by 5:45. So we'll just have that as a note. So we have an agenda in front of us. Does anyone have any potential additions to the agenda? Anything to be added? Okay. Could I please have a motion for adoption of the agenda? Got a second, please?
Second.
All right. You do a roll call or just all in favor, say aye. Any objections?
Aye.
All right, we have the August 23rd, 2023 meeting minutes. They're in your packet. Does anyone have any revisions to those meeting minutes? Okay, would someone make a motion, please, to adopt the meeting minutes? Okay, a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. We'll do the same for the
Actually,
joint.
I have to abstain, I was not there.
Okay, got it. The next one was the joint session that we had with our friends over in Stanton and Waynesboro, and I thought that was a really great meeting. Y'all did a lovely job putting it together.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any revisions that you want to have to make? Okay. May I have a motion, please, to adopt those meeting minutes? Second?
A second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Fantastic. So we have an agenda and we have our meeting minutes. Item 4, moving toward 2050 plan updates. Ms. Shackelford, I think you're going to review the main findings of the first phase of public engagement and provide some recommendations for weighting of the evaluation metrics.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
So it's been a little bit since we talked about the long-range transportation plan. We had our joint meeting, so there's a lot of information to cover with you all at this meeting. I'm going to try to move quickly through this, but feel free to stop me if you have any questions at any point. So first of all, just as a reminder, we have been working basically since February to do this first round of public engagement. We started with some stakeholder meetings to better define our goals and objectives, and then we've been conducting more general public outreach basically throughout the summer. And the goals that we had established for this first phase of public engagement were to set and establish and prioritize the goals for our transportation system regionally, identify from the public what they see as the travel needs for the region, and then also use the information that we receive from the public to really guide how much weight to put on the different evaluation metrics related to the evaluation of the data when we get to the data analysis part of the long-range transportation plan. So those were our 3 goals for how we were going to incorporate the engagement from the public. So this slide, I'm not going to go through all of it. I just want to highlight the level of effort that our staff has put in to get the public engagement to date. We were able to document contact with almost 600 individuals. I think technically we reached 599. I was a little disappointed we didn't get that last one, but pretty close to 600. And that included 16 different community events that our staff was able to show a presence at, and total we reviewed more than 2,000 comments. So the comments were collected as part of our Metro Request survey that was out to the public. It was collected through the public intercepts and our public engagement opportunities where we went out into the community. And then it also includes an analysis of comments and feedback that were received through previous engagement efforts, which included the Charlottesville Comprehensive Plan, the Albemarle Comprehensive Plan feedback that had been gathered to date, and then also the Transit Vision Plan. So utilizing all of the information that had been collected through some of these previously completed, but also very much still relevant studies. This graph just shows a breakdown of what the source is for all of the public comments that we received. So out of all the comments that were analyzed, you can see about half of them came from our MetroQuest survey of the 2,300, and then approximately another 40%, so about 800 or so, came from the past engagement efforts, and then another 12% came from the in-person engagement. So that's where our feedback was collected as far as the comments that we received. So the information that we were collecting from the MetroQuest survey, we basically had 4 different types of data collection that we were asking people to respond to. The first is that we presented the different scoring priorities: safety, environment, multimodal accessibility, land use coordination, and the efficiency and economic development. And we're asking for public feedback to prioritize among those 5 different prioritization categories. The second exercise is that we presented the public or the respondents with a couple of different trade-off scenarios and asked them to weight where on the scale they might prefer one trade-off compared to another trade-off. And then we asked for the comments through the interactive map, so I'll go through those in a little bit. And then finally, we collected demographic information, so we knew who was represented in the survey and what types of populations we might want to do more intentional outreach for, that whose perspectives were not being captured in the survey. So just to go through this briefly, when we asked the survey respondents to prioritize among the different scoring categories, this is the outcomes that you'll see. The majority of survey respondents prioritized safety. That was the highest, followed by environmental considerations, and then followed by multimodal accessibility. And here, scoring the lowest from the survey respondents were the categories for land use coordination, and then efficiency and economic development. Now, there could be a number of reasons for that. I could come up with some theories for why this happened. We did include definitions for what we meant when we said land use coordination, so there was more information that survey respondents could respond to. But based on what was presented to them in the survey, this is how they ranked these different scoring priorities among themselves. The 3 sets of trade-off questions we asked, the first one was related to how much prioritization should we give to roadway improvements versus prioritizing multiple modes of transportation. And this was really intended to help understand, should we be continuing to prioritize roadway improvements, or should we continue investing in projects that are primarily going to support public transportation, active transportation projects. And as you can see, based on the public respondents, there was more favorable responses for prioritizing the multiple modes of transportation, not just integrating them into roadway projects. I'll also mention that as part of developing the survey, what I tried to do was sort of make the best case argument for why one might suggest that it's more important to prioritize one or the other. So respondents could respond based on which argument they agreed with more strongly. So the next trade-off question we asked is it more important to improve access to jobs, or is it more important to improve access to non-job community destinations, things like grocery stores or coffee shops or places where people might need to run errands, or helping support maybe what would be considered more economic development job centers. And there was some feedback that we received that probably places where people want to run errands are also places where people have jobs. So there is some overlap between us, but it is an interesting question to ask. And so what you'll see is that the distribution here was pretty even, with most people falling in the middle. It's not necessarily more important to prioritize one or the other. They're both really important for people for overall quality of life. And then this last question was really intended to gauge what the public favored in terms of what our strongest actions should be related to addressing climate change and climate action goals that have been identified in the region. So this was intended to say, should we focus on reducing congestion on the roadways, meaning really help reduce unproductive idling, making sure cars aren't sitting somewhere not going where they want to go, improving roadway operations? Or should we prioritize active and public transportation to provide an alternative to single occupancy vehicles? And again, there was a stronger preference for prioritizing active and public transportation as a preference for addressing or moving towards our climate action goals in the region. This just goes into the mapping exercises. I'm not going to spend too much time on here, but you'll see that based on the feedback that we received through the MetroQuest survey, It was a little bit over 1,100 comments that we received, so almost 500 of those, just a little under half, were related to bicycle and pedestrian, either places where they identified a need or places where they identified an improvement. So they might say this is an unsafe bicycle or pedestrian situation, or they might say I would like some sort of infrastructure improvement here. A little under a quarter of the projects were related to safety, and just about the same amount of those were related to roadway improvements. And then 139 comments were related to public transit. So that's kind of the breakout from the MetroQuest survey comments. I'll also mention that there's probably some overlap between some of these. So somebody could have, people chose which kind of label to put on their comments. So they might label it as a bicycle and pedestrian need, but it could also be a safety need potentially. So there is some context that will need to be applied to these. The consultants have pulled all of this information into a map where you can go to the dots and you can see what the comment was. So we'll be able to look at this with a little bit more information and be able to share that publicly. But this is just intended to give us a really high level view. And then this map shows all the comments that were collected for the region. So again, it kind of just looks like a lot of dots right now, but it does give us a lot of information for once we start sort of overlapping the information and the data together. This is a really good baseline to help us understand what kinds of feedback and what kinds of projects people might want at these different locations. The majority of the projects were in the City of Charlottesville in the urban ring of Albemarle County, and you can see that they're clustered along North 29 and then also in Crozet. And then there are some comments around 64, but you can see that there are quite a few also in the stretch of 250 here. But we'll provide some additional information as we start using this information to really help us start identifying where the priority transportation needs are, and then helping to match where our candidate projects are related to the transportation needs. I just want to take a quick note. I'm not actually going to go through all the demographic information as part of the presentation today, but I did print out the demographic breakout for what the respondents, how the respondents responded to the survey for MetroQuest. But I do want to caveat that a little bit, that this is just the demographic information that you have is just who responded to the survey, not overall. We used basically the responses from the survey to determine which populations were underrepresented, and that helped us inform some of our public engagement efforts in terms of where we might want to conduct outreach to get a better overall representation for the community. So I do just want to highlight that. We do not have an overall demographic report for the entire community because we were not collecting demographic information at the in-person intercepts. So as far as what we heard in person, basically we documented all of the comments that we received through all of those public intercepts, those 16 meetings. We documented all of that feedback, and the consultant team at EPR went through and coded all of those and started categorizing these based on themes that were emerging. So what you can see is that the number one the highest number of comments were received were related to public transit, which makes sense, especially since we did some outreach at the transit center, followed by a combination of comments related to bicycle and pedestrian needs, and then followed by safety. Those were kind of both, we had 75 comments related to both of those. And then the next two categories were related to system-wide efficiency and connections. One thing I want to say about connections, because you'll see in this circle right next to here, is that there's this small number for land use, is that a lot of the connections comments were related to sidewalks or walkability of an area. So it probably would make sense to consider those connections largely supporting some of the land use goals that have been identified through some of the different transportation plannings. So those are the primary types of comments that we received through that. And then one of the other things that we did at a few of the public intercepts that were more of the drop-in events was we tried to replicate that ranking process that we went through on the MetroQuest survey. So we played what we're referring to as a money game, where basically people would come to the table, we'd give them fake money, not real money. We had a lot of confusion here about like, no, we do not want your real money. We would give them 100 transportation dollars. They had a train on them. We were not like counterfeiting any money or anything, and asked them to invest in these different categories. And it's pretty interesting because there was pretty wide range of what emerged as the priorities at some of the different public intercepts. So I don't know that this is necessarily universally indicative, but it does show how different people based on their context might respond differently to what's important to them. One thing I want to note is that the blue here is the feedback we got at the transit center. And at the transit center, they really resonated. The whole idea of having an efficient system and efficient system was really important. So that their number one response was the multimodal accessibility, but then that was followed by efficiency, because once they're on the bus, they want the buses to run efficiently. They don't want to be faced with travel delays. So I thought that was a really interesting observation from the transit center. But otherwise, there was a pretty broad range of responses based on where we were and who we were talking to. I also want to mention, though, another thing that was really interesting is that as we were talking to people in person, this whole idea of safety was a less common theme that came up. So when you ask people specifically, what should we prioritize, and you lift safety, accessibility, they're saying safety, but when they're providing comments to us, safety was less common of a thing that just came up in the feedback that was provided. And this map just shows, based on the in-person engagement that we conducted through the long-range transportation planning effort, this is where whenever somebody mentioned a specific location or improvement, we mapped that as well. So based on our in-person engagement, this is where the public had identified travel needs. Again, we're going to combine this with the MetroQuest survey, but wanted to show that there were, what each of those efforts uniquely told us. So then the consultants also analyzed the past engagement results, as we had talked about: Albemarle County comprehensive planning feedback, Charlottesville comprehensive planning feedback, and the transit vision plan. And it's fairly similar. Public transit, again, was the top ranking type of comment, followed by bicycle and pedestrian improvements. And then you'll see down here that right around the same level, between 170 and 180 comments each, were the ideas of supporting projects that would support land use, connections, and again, you can kind of maybe almost consider those in conjunction with each other, and then system-wide efficiency, and to a lesser extent, safety. So it's possible that this specific form of engagement wasn't prioritizing safety, since it wasn't a transportation-specific feedback opportunity, especially for the comprehensive plans. But I did want to note that safety seemed to emerge as a slightly lower priority based on the past engagement that we reviewed. And then again, similarly to the other efforts, if there were comments that had specific recommendations that were based on locations, those were also mapped. So we have all of this mapping data that is being pulled into a single map for review. So we have all of this data right here. The next step that we're going to talk about in just a minute is how to prioritize the evaluation of the data, how to evaluate the data to understand the system performance. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start mapping these and looking for matches between where there's a transportation need identified and where we have candidate projects that are already lined up. So the candidate projects are projects that have already been identified through some of our past planning efforts, either through the previous long-range transportation plan, an Albemarle County or Charlottesville specific plan, either their comprehensive plan, a small area study, one of the pipeline projects like what VDOT is working on right now. Anything that helps us develop and identify projects, we're pulling all of the projects that have been identified, and that those become our candidate projects. So we're going to look for matches between existing candidate projects, transportation needs. We're also going to look at where there aren't matches, and that's going to help us understand where there might be a need for future studies to help develop solutions. So we pulled all of that information together. This is the map of our candidate projects right now. So we'll be using those to overlay with the transportation needs. There are quite a few of them to choose from. We'll be narrowing this down, so you don't have to evaluate.
These candidate projects came from people's feedback, or?
No, the candidate projects came from previously completed studies or previously identified. So those are our VDOT pipeline projects, small area plans, things that were identified as recommendations. Yeah. All right. So very high level, and again, there's a whole public engagement report that gets into a little bit more detail, but the general theme of the engagement that we've heard so far is that people desire safer roadways and intersections, dedicated and protected bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, and an enhanced public transit system, and seem to want to prioritize safety and accessibility over maybe some of the more car-centric improvements that could be considered. So before we move on, because I'm going to ask you all to kind of reflect on this when we start talking about the evaluation metrics and how much weighting to give to those, I just wanted to pause and see if you had any questions or feedback or comments. Yes.
So was there any consideration of the different regions? And what's been reported makes a lot of sense for an inner city.
Mm-hmm.
But for someone living in a rural area where there is no access to any of these things, then I just don't know how I can get to town without a car.
Mm-hmm.
There's no other option for people who live out there. So to see that there's total prioritization by the numbers so far for bike and ped and forget about the roads, then that's a real problem for anybody living outside the donut and even in the donut. So that's just something I would love to have more input and have you explain more about how those were delineated going forward. And doesn't have to be right now, but that is, I'm not prepared to say yes to this without knowing that.
Sure, yeah, understood. Any other questions or comment or feedback?
I would just say that I'm surprised that there's not any concern about traffic congestion, because that seems like a pretty pressing issue.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be a number of factors. Yeah, I think again, keep in mind that the public information is intended to inform decision making, but doesn't necessarily have to be the decision maker in this process. That's ultimately your job as the governing body. All right. Well, then we can talk a little bit then about the about kind of what this means for our evaluation of the data and the different weighting scenarios. And this might be Supervisor Malik, where we have a little bit more of discussion related to your concerns as well as your observations, Ms. Monteith. But basically what we're going to have to do based on the public feedback that we've used and what we've intended for this to be doing is to be informing how much weight we give to each of the evaluation metrics as we look at the data. So not last month, 2 months ago, we talked about the different thresholds that we were going to use for the data analysis. So I'll go to that. Maybe it's easier to go to that slide first. So we looked at all of the different evaluation metrics, determine what thresholds we were going to use to determine what qualified as a need in order to make it into the system for evaluation. And now what we need to do is start looking at how much weight we want to give each of these performance metrics. So before we get into the evaluation metrics specifically, the first thing we can do is start talking about like more big picture. How much weight would it make sense to give to each of these different prioritization categories? So when we developed the office or the prioritization process with the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment retained consultants, they developed a couple of suggested weighting scenarios. We don't have to use any of these as they are presented, but they do give us a good opportunity to start with, to see how much weight we might want to give to the different priorities based on how, to what extent we want to incorporate the public feedback, or to what extent they might reflect what our goals are for this region. So the accessibility focus scenario is going to focus on helping people to destinations. And so it is going to give less weight to the efficiency and economic development performance measure and more weight to the land use coordination measure. The balanced scenario is basically saying all of these are important, and maybe we want to consider them all equally as important and just give equal weight to all of these different prioritization categories. And then the mobility focused measure, this focuses a little bit more on the system efficiency and operations. And so it's going to put more weight on those efficiency types of measures and a little bit less influence on that land use coordination. So based on the public feedback we received, it seems like there's strong public support for the accessibility focused weighting scenario. That was what was recommended by the MPO technical committee. But if you all want to discuss this at this point, or if you want to wait to look at the evaluation metrics in more detail, we can do that here. But any initial responses to these different scenarios?
My initial response is that I don't care what they say, I think safety always has to be a top priority.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they may not think about it may be a good thing, but it doesn't mean we don't think about it.
Sure. Yeah, and I will mention, I don't know if this changes maybe whether or not you support these different weighting scenarios, but we do have safety being weighted at least as high as the next highest category in all of these scenarios.
I'm also curious, I'm trying to think about what it would mean to have, just to take the accessibility focused scenario, what it would mean to have a lower priority for efficiency and economic development. How would that manifest itself?
The efficiency and economic development measure, so we can look at what's actually being measured under those economic development. Basically, if there is a operational concern, so if a project is scoring high in relationship to how much congestion a road segment is experiencing, or very high on the travel time reliability, meaning that the amount of time it's going to take you to get somewhere is very unpredictable because there's a lot of potential disruption in the area. What that means is that that's what's being evaluated under that efficiency. So if a project is scoring high in that category, but then it's not demonstrating that there are safety improvements or potential for accessibility improvement or something like that, that congestion score just isn't going to do very much to bring that type of project to the top of the list.
So is efficiency and economic development, is congestion the sort of the underlying premise for all of it?
Congestion and also on-time transit performance, but that's also related to the congestion of the roadways.
So when you said a minute ago that one of the concerns was the predictability of how long it takes to get someplace, I would think that the predictability would be a problem whether you're in a car or whether you're in a bus.
Correct.
So I'm not sure how I understand how that would enter into the judgment about how that factor ought to get weighted.
The predictability that would be captured in the planning time index regardless. The planning time index is mode independent, it's related to the roadway. So anybody who's using the road, that would be reflected. We're also, because one of our goals for developing these performance measures was to make sure that we were measuring performance for, make sure we were developing a truly multimodal process, was to make sure that we weren't just looking at metrics related to vehicular movement, but also on-time transit or transit and other modal movement. And so for the efficiency piece, it made sense to also look at transit on-time performance, which will be impacted by the performance of the roadway system as well. So there is a little bit of overlap or intersection between the transit on-time performance and maybe some of the travel time index and travel time predictability measures.
I guess I'm trying to understand, following up on what I just said. So if there's congestion around job sites or school sites, when everybody's trying to get to the same place at the same time, that's what you're talking about as far as accessibility under economic development.
That would be captured in the efficiency,
which is lumped together,
metric with the economic development. Yeah. The accessibility isn't related to the operations. The accessibility is related to except for the vehicle. I will say that is captured in the vehicle movement. So there is a potential for accessibility improvement that is captured in the vehicular accessibility metric.
What does PAI stand for?
Sorry, that's a potential for accessibility improvement. That's the, if you remember 2 months ago when we were talking about like all the different blocks and how there's an opportunity to improve access by increasing the comfort and efficiency of movement by different mode, that's that potential for accessibility improvement measure.
So we'll say bike lane, what you're describing.
Yeah, so
Separated bike, so commuters could ride over there because they're not having to be in.
right, so if you move from like a Shero, to a separated protected bike lane, that would be an accessibility improvement, correct?
Okay.
So really, we're looking for a recommendation from you all on which of these weighting scenarios to use. The MPO Technical Advisory Committee did have general consensus supporting this accessibility focused weighting scenario, but I'll defer to you all, obviously.
Back to the other graph that showed the other.
This one?
Maybe you answered the question that I didn't hear the answer, or maybe I didn't ask the question clearly enough. I'm trying to figure out, as I look at accessibility focus and mobility focus, one gets 10% in efficiency economic development, and the other gets 10% in land use coordination. As a practical matter, what is going to be the difference between those two focuses?
Yeah, so the mobility focus will obviously give more weight to projects that will improve congestion. So that's going to give more priority probably to more roadway-centric, traditional roadway-centric projects. The land use coordination is looking for, this is going to give more priority to projects that are in high densely developed areas where there's already a lot of different basically destinations within that growth area. So to help provide strong intermodal, largely walking, biking, transit access within already established high density areas, basically trying to help people be able to walk and bike between different community destinations.
Do either of these scenarios take a look at what we're expecting 5-10 years from now?
All of them, so the land use coordination score is the only one that uses our future growth projections. That's the only scoring metric that uses future growth, but that does incorporate the population growth estimates.
I was looking at something just recently, we was talking about Crozet expecting to be 12,000 to 16,000 people by the end of the decade. And I was wondering, as I knew I was going to be coming to this meeting, what would that mean for the MPO, for transit, et cetera?
Yeah, I think, well, that's a conversation they have. I mean, I'm sure Supervisor Malik could tell you that's a regular conversation they have within Crozet, because really they want stronger infrastructure to support growth, like not just the growth within Crozet itself, but also supporting the travel in and out of Crozet.
Is there one of these scenarios that would be more responsive to that kind of concern than the other?
I don't think I'm going to be very helpful, because it depends. It depends on if you want to support travel within the growth area, or if you want to make travel more efficient, like within the larger region. So I'd say for the former, the accessibility focused might support people being able to walk within Crozet, walk to the parks, walk to school, things like that. The mobility focus will help reduce travel delay for people that might be traveling from Crozet into Charlottesville or Pantops or something like that.
But this has got to be something that is agreed to for the whole planning district, right?
We are asking for.
It's not like we could say this part for Crozet and this part for Belmont.
Yeah, we are asking for this to be like a regional scoring metric. What I want to reassure you all of, though, is that this is just one source of information. We're not necessarily holding you all to the outcomes that come from this. This just gives us an indication on, based on these different weighting scenarios, this might be more of a priority. And we're still going to review all of those with you all to see if they make sense.
It's a guide.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a guide.
It seems like the sort of safe way of doing this is to just pick balanced, which doesn't look like we're adding much to the conversation. What I will say, the one that you have there, accessibility focused, I have a lot of respect for the MPO Tech Committee, and it seems like they have the time and expertise to delve into this more than I do in the event. So I would, and in general, I'm supportive of an emphasis on accessibility over increasing roadway, which is, I guess, is sort of the distinction. So I don't know, you're looking to sort of get a sense of the temperature, or you
Yes.
want us to sort of vote on this?
No, we're trying to get consensus just so we can start our data analysis using these weightings. And again, we're not going to hold you to any of these necessarily. This is just intended to give us some more information to have a conversation.
For this to be meaningfully used in the next round,
Mhm.
it has to be understandable.
Mm-hmm.
Others may be there, but I'm not. So I'll have more homework to do to try to figure out how, whatever is chosen, how it's really going to be used. I mean, when you see the wide variety in the inputs,
Mm-hmm.
you know, whether it was driven by some group being more organized than others or what, I don't have any idea about that, but it always makes me wonder how you get 500 in one and 22 in another. And, so that's, and this was supposed to be something that was going to be replicable in, you know, across the state. Wasn't that the whole point of this whole consultancy for this? And so, you know,
Yeah.
I don't know where we're going.
So I guess in the interest of time, Sean, you have any feedback?
No, I mean, I think, I was just looking at the environmental piece, which is kind of really focusing on the flooding exposure, which I think is good, but I would like to think that there's other things that we could look at for the environment also. But I think the flooding one is something that we know, we put our hands on and see the data associated with it. And using that as a multiplier, simply what they're proposing for the smart scale change and using land use as a multiplier is really good. So if you've got an area that is prone to flooding, it's going to rise to the top because of that multiplier, especially if you've got other safety concerns in the area. So I think, for what it's worth right now, I think this is good.
I have a follow-up question. So do you mean that there's an existing infrastructure and it's prone to flooding and therefore it should get work? Not that you're considering putting new infrastructure into a place which floods, which would be
Correct.
bad.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
First.
Yeah. So.
You don't want to make it
We
easier.
don't want to do
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Stacey?
no excessive.
And I don't think I have anything really substantive to add. I don't know that choosing the balance scenario is going to be too much. It sort of muddies, right, the different measures.
As you go one side to the other.
I think that's what I would advise. I won't tell you which one, which way to go there. And ultimately, Sandy, this is to run a scenario that will give a ranked list that can then be adjusted.
Correct.
It's a guide. So,
Correct.
you know, perhaps the thought of going with what the tech committee says is a good way to start, and then look at that compared to what some of the other inputs are on where your needs are.
And when you say a scenario, you're talking about modeling and changes in travel times and all that kind of thing at this level?
For the scenario, we're just looking at, we're going to use all this information. It's going to prioritize different road segments and intersections and say, this is where your highest priority needs are if we analyze the data using these measures. Yeah.
Ned?
I mean, really, it comes down to that efficiency, economic development, land use, because those are the only two that are flip-flopping. I mean, I'm fine with going with the accessibility one, because I know walkability is a priority, but you know, this is one where I would love something to show me, like, you take an actual project and show me how the nuances switch so that I can see that. You know, travel time, I guess it must be in the nitty-gritty of the project, where when you look at a specific project, you go, we're really trying to attack travel time, even if it's accessibility focused, and it's a project where walkability is not necessarily that important in that project area, then that's when we have to subjectively go, no, we're going to go against kind of the ranking and say it for this reason. So we don't lose anything by picking one of these because of the guide's nature of it. But to help me understand it more, to see a project that scores with 30% on one and then flip-flop it, I'd like, does that change it from a 5? You know, like, how's that realistically do? I don't think you can give that to us right now. I'm just saying that maybe we go with one, and then when it comes back, we, in the first round or whatever, you start having a couple projects where you would show how the different scenarios actually go for those.
Yeah, and one of the challenges is that we're actually not scoring projects right now. We're scoring transportation needs. But what we can do is, once we sort of have all of the data and the metrics in place, we have those with the thresholds, I don't think it's going to be as challenging to change the weighting. So we can maybe show what one output is compared to another output, and see like maybe where there are changes or adjustments. But for now, it sounds like you all are leaning towards at least tentatively supporting the accessibility focused scenario as a first go.
I think it would be good to see which segments show up. That way the conversation we have, because it really comes into like the local calibration of where we go in the areas. To kind of see what this up, because it's for the entire region, and to hear from each individual if we feel that that kind of really fits the needs of where we know issues are at.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that good for now?
Yep, that's good for now. Thank you all.
Sure.
Hopefully this will make more sense once we start putting it into place and we see the outputs coming together.
Okay, so I think next on the list, the Regional Transit Governance Study update.
Do you want to run it through?
Sure. So I'm just going to give a quick update on the Regional Transit Governance Study. We are heading into phase 4, and then phase 5 will be recommendations. So we're looking at governance options at the moment. And so we had a steering committee meeting in September and talked about the different types of governance and structure for that. And some of the things that we discussed were board membership, and then the role in transit planning, the role of the agency in transit planning, which some of these things will help the jurisdictions feel more comfortable with joining a regional transit authority and raising revenue locally to go into this. And then we talked about indicators of accountability, which are, representation for the board, and then there could be a technical advisory committee that would advise them on that decision-making criteria, so that the jurisdictions would know how decisions are going to be made, and we could, weight them, as we just discussed now with the long-range transportation plan. We could, we have a list of projects, transit projects in the vision plan, so there would be a way to prioritize them. We also talked about financial reporting and the funding oversight. Those are some of the things that a governance structure for a regional transit authority would look at. Thanks. So currently, this is the state of transit funding at the moment, and it's about $9 million for about each transit agency. And why is it not? There we go. Okay. And for the vision plan, we worked on the assumption of a constrained budget, which would cost about $35 million, and an unconstrained budget, which totaled up to about $85 million. And you can see here the different contributions, and then the deficit that we would need to make up to enact the vision plan, the constrained and unconstrained. So what we would be looking to raise with the transit authority would be an additional $18 million. And we
That's per year.
Yes, yeah, it's for services. So we discussed a lot of local funding options, like the general funds expenditure, and I'm not gonna go through all of these, they're in the packet, and I have a report over there, because there's a couple slides of these. Yeah, so then I've got these tables, and I think, again, they're in the handout that you got. And there are also a couple extras up there. So tax revenue is the only one that we looked at that would need state authorization to enact and collect. And we calculated out how much we could raise starting in fiscal year 2025 and then going through 2029 for each jurisdiction. So you can see the sales tax would raise a total of $36 million, which would be enough to fund the projects in the vision plan. And then there's a lodging tax revenue, which would be about $1 million total for the region. Personal property tax, about $12.5 million. The real estate tax would be $50 million. And yeah, that one. And we spoke with each of the.
Charlottesville's tapped out right now.
But just to be clear, when it says additional 0.1% tax, that means 10 cents.
That's a lot, yeah.
Yeah,
It's about $1 million a penny, right?
at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we.
0.1% doesn't sound like much, but when you think of it, it's actually a 10% increase in our taxes.
Yeah, when we spoke with the jurisdictions about these different options, Charlottesville thought that that one was not an option.
Cross hives.
Yeah. Yeah. So the next steps are we are engaging the jurisdictions in individual meetings and also another steering committee meeting. And
what does that mean? Come into like city council or the board of supervisors meeting?
no, so we're working with the steering committee, which is one representative, one elected official for each jurisdiction, and one staff member for each jurisdiction.
Is Lloyd ours?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've been copying you on it. You're welcome to join.
I appreciate it. I've seen the email.
Since you don't have enough meetings to go.
Yeah, we're open to having.
No, I know that.
As long as we're meeting open meeting laws.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so.
One question about all this. So at the Democracy 360 event last week, the DBA President Ryan and the working group that he has set up with the community, gave an update, and they mentioned transit at some point, but didn't really talk about sort of specifics. Does that team meet on a regular basis? I mean, I know y'all gotten some feedback from UVA as part of your, but I don't know, I was just gonna send this to one of the members on the committee so that they know about it.
I mean, I would be happy to engage with them. I don't know.
I mean, this is different than like with UTS directly. This is like a different.
Yeah, Julie is on the steering committee for the governance study. Yeah.
As far as the community partnerships, I don't think that they're all doing the same thing. Like, I'm involved with the Affordable Housing Initiative. What we're doing is different than, so I look into it for you in terms of what that actual group is doing. But I think a lot of this conversation is happening with regional transit partnership.
Yeah, sure.
And talking about the different.
Which is tomorrow.
The different transit organizations we have and how they might better work together.
Yeah. I'm just thinking like in terms of, I just hope that, I mean, there's that mechanism of which change gets made, the sort of like regular standing meetings that we have, and I think there could also be another way, maybe a more sort of blue sky way of change occurring if those, the leadership of those committees really understood what we're trying to do here. University might be more inclined to say, yeah, sure, we want to get on board with this, just like they're getting on board a workforce training and, you know, all of that. It was interesting, all the thing in affordable housing, you know. So I think it just feels like there's some, and I could do it, I could look up the committee and send them the presentation, but, you know.
Why don't I'm just making a note for myself to kind of dig into that a little bit and understand what they understand we're doing, what their entities are doing.
Yeah, I think that'd be great, because they mentioned transit a lot in their conversation the other day, and yeah, I'm just not sure. I have no idea, maybe they are fully aware of this, but I don't think they are.
I would love to connect with them, make sure we're all working together on the same page.
Well, it's great that Julie is on there.
Yeah.
That makes a big difference.
Yeah, and the regional transit partnership, we also work with parking and transit too, so.
Because, I mean, it could be the case that that committee, you know, I don't want to speak for them, but I just think that this is one of those kind of more blue sky kind of, you know, higher level vision type things where you could have a real alignment between what that committee is wanting to do and what we all need the university to do. And they might be a source of revenue, not to speak for them at all, but it's a thought, so.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, so next steps. So we're gonna be engaging the jurisdictions, which you've already started on, talking about the governance structures and trying to come to a consensus with the jurisdictions on what would work for them. And then also we'll be talking about revenue sources. And then we'll finalize kind of a proposed governance option, which is something I think like the blue sky, like this will really help the community move forward with transit, because it'll have a structure of making the regional decisions around transit that engages all of the jurisdictions and everybody feels comfortable with. And so that's something that we can kind of lean back on and utilize to continue moving forward. And then we will produce a final report with recommendations and present that to the different board of supervisors and the city council.
And how soon until y'all are done?
This project will end at the end of December. Okay. So.
The point that I made the comment, because we had this presentation at the commissioners meeting, not this exact one, but a similar one. And you know, you look around there, all the counties are represented there, and anytime you see tax increase in some of our neighboring counties, they want, you know, you're getting the eyeballs. But you know, the creation of the transit authority, I think I made this comment then, was that opens up new funding to come down because of the authority. So the increase, if there is to be one, is almost like a match, because you're not having to pay for all of that. Right. So if that constrained and unconstrained is really what we need, and it opens up those contributions because we have that authority, the deficit now becomes what the localities can gain all of that money for what they put in. Doesn't mean you have to do sales tax or transient occupancy tax. You're just going to go, if you want to participate, this is your piece. Now you figure out how to pay for it. Right. You're not backed into having to raise tax and dedicate that tax rate to it. You just have to go, well, budget for it. Yeah. Now, does it replace what, like, so in Albemarle, we pay for our transit services. We pay CAT, and we pay, you know, we give money to them to do that. Would that money just go into this instead, and then it all gets paid out of the regional transit authority?
I think that's still part of possible. What is possible. There's do you remember what it's called? There's a term for it, but
if that were to occur.
Maintenance of effort.
Yes, maintenance of effort. Thank you.
If that were to occur and Albemarle's portion's 24 million and we're already, I don't remember what we pay for this, but that 24 million would be deducted out and then the remainder would be there. So it could be that money you're already putting into the system's already included in the total. It's not all brand new money you have to find. Right. So if you quickly just go, well, that's 10 cents, you know, and I'm not criticizing your point. I mean, you're exactly right. But yeah, that is it in total, but that doesn't mean it's all necessarily new money. Some of the money is going to be shifted. Then there'll be whatever the remainder is. And then that remainder, you go, well, wait a minute, if I'm paying into that, and that's getting us an additional, what, $17 million or $15 million, that's a different conversation than just you're adding $8 million to your fund.
That's a really good point.
One other thing for you, on your list, will you be including comparisons? I'm thinking of, say, College, Pennsylvania, where the university, all those tens of thousands of students, their ridership at the university is part of the region because they're all consolidated. And so this puts them in a monstrously more competitive situation with the feds to get money, transit money down. So that's something as I think my guess is that it's up to the city and county to get to the table and say, we've agreed on this, and then perhaps the university may say, okay, we have grown-ups here now, so we can join in. I'm guessing that like with the water, it was up to the jurisdictions to figure it out, and then they were willing to come to the table at the end, so they're not having to be the arbiter or whatever. That's a difficult position in which to put that. But that would be a huge incentive of the way that they could benefit our whole funding stream by helping.
Just by having extra
UTS
human beings that
and
are
those
part
are
of the
tens of
pool.
thousands of riders.
Mhm.
If we were in some, whatever the consolidated form that other jurisdictions, other places use, then it allows them to be on a totally different level for federal highway dollars, which is great.
Even if they weren't contributing any more money themselves, it would, just the fact that they were part of that, the ridership.
I would never say no thank you to cash from the
Sure.
university, for sure, but they are,
But your point
their
is
operations
about,
money is already being spent,
right,
and figuring out a way that we could count those riders
I
as
see.
our authority riders would be a huge benefit, I think, to us going forward, for Charlottesville.
And it's not just Albemarle, Charlottesville, and UVA. This theorizes Nelson, Green, and now that opens up more than just what the city Albemarle UVA dynamic sometimes can churn into. You have a different set of views coming to say, well, wait a minute, this is bigger than 3 jurisdictions. This is, how many employees and patients do they pull in from these other counties outside of it? So it's probably going to be a different formula for them than if it's just Albemarle and Charlottesville. Yeah.
We don't want to miss out on any riders wherever they're coming from.
I think that's the end of it.
Oh, okay.
Anything else?
That's all I have.
Thank you very much.
Now, let me ask, just because, I've always kind of assumed the regional transit partnership's taken the lead on some of this stuff. That is true, right?
Yes.
They're at some point going to go, this is our recommendation.
Yes.
And then this body, the PVC, the jurisdictions will then take that. So that's how that plays out.
Well, the jurisdictions will take it.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be up to them to decide.
Yeah.
what to do.
Yeah.
But in terms of, to Ned's point, when this work is done in December, are you going to look for the RTP and the MPO to say, yeah, we sign off on this? Some sort of formal endorsement?
I think what we are going to be asking is for the commission, and Christine's on, so Christine, feel free to jump in if I misstate this. We're going to be asking for the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission to basically indicate that they are supportive of us continuing to make efforts. There's probably not going to be an immediate next step. There's going to be sort of preparing for what the next step looks like in implementation, but we're going to be looking for general direction from the commission at that point. Do you want to add anything, Christine?
No, that's exactly right. We'll be asking the commission for consensus on continuing to move this forward.
Excellent. Okay, next item up, socioeconomic data for travel demand model. That sounds really good.
Sounds riveting, right? I get the privilege of talking to you about all the data, I guess, today. All right, so first of all, just before we start talking about the socioeconomic data, because this is something that I need some action on from you all tonight, I'm just going to give you a really high-level overview of why we're asking for this data, and that is because we need to update this information in order to run our travel demand model. So the travel demand model is basically an analytical tool that we use to develop traffic forecasts. So one of the things we talk about is existing congestion and future congestion. This is outputs and information we get from the model. So the model will help us produce a map that looks kind of like this map right here on the left, where the red segments show places where the the volume of anticipated traffic on the road, or in some cases current traffic on the road, exceeds the existing capacity of the roadway. So that indicates where there are going to be operational failures or where a segment is going to start experiencing congestion, basically. So a couple of things that we can do with the model. First of all, it helps us understand future scenarios for what traffic looks like compared to what it might look like in the future based on our growth assumptions. It helps us test alternative scenarios so we can compare what does the operations of the roadway network look like under existing conditions compared to what it might look like if we implement some sort of improvement. And then it helps us evaluate between different types of improvements. What does it look like if we expand the capacity of one road versus extending the capacity on another road that might be a parallel road network, and helps us understand how all of that could impact future traffic conditions. So what the travel demand model evaluates is how many trips are generated, how trips are distributed through the region, how different modal choices might impact demand on our roadway segments, and then basically how vehicles are traveling between different zones. So what routes vehicles are taking to get from one destination to another. So that's what the travel demand model does. But we need to provide some information in order for it to develop those outputs. And so we do this by establishing what's called these traffic analysis zones. So these are smaller geographic boundaries that are used to evaluate the number of trips because we assign different information to each of these different geographic boundaries that are developed. That includes socioeconomic data, like things like the number of automobiles per household, how many types of different jobs based on the different types of sectors are estimated within each of these traffic analysis zones, what's the average number of school-aged children, are there group living quarters or university dormitories, that kind of thing within each of those TAZs. And based all of this information that we are entering in for the TAZs, that's going to generate estimated trips from each of the TAZs, as well as how many trips are going to be attracted to each of these TAZs, which helps us understand how much traffic is going in and out of each of these TAZs and helping us understand what the transportation network might look like. So we have to develop information both based on the current conditions, so current baseline data, and then also future growth projection data in order to run the model. This is something that we do in conjunction with VDOT, and it's also, I want you all to know that one of the reasons we do that is because we are required to, since our region has a model, we are required to use it as part of our long-range transportation plan, and we are required to maintain this in perpetuity. So we do this because it is helpful to help us understand the impact of different improvements we could implement, but also it is a requirement. So what we need to do right now is that we are not changing the geographic boundaries of the traffic analysis zones right now. We're going to have to do that in the future. We're not doing that right now, but what we do need to do is update the socioeconomic data for our region in order to be able to run the model for use in our current long-range transportation plan, and the policy board must approve the use of the socioeconomic data. So our staff has worked with the VDOT modeling staff to prepare updated socioeconomic data. We have basically taken the data that was prepared for the 2045, the previous long-range transportation plan, applied the same sort of growth projection assumptions for that data, and did an interpolation, which is a standard accepted way to develop this data in order to develop the updated socioeconomic data. This has been through a quality control process. So we compared what the population is that we get from this method compared to the Weldon Cooper Center's population, and it is within the accepted threshold. We have reviewed this approach with locality staff as well as the MPO Technical Advisory Committee. They are comfortable with this approach, but we do need formal action from the policy board to approve the use of the data. If you are so inclined, or we're so inclined, we did include a link to the data itself, but I think really we're having a conversation more about the general approach we're using.
So there's a model,
Yeah, yep.
it's, so we're not quite taking an average, I guess, but like, we're saying if one parameter was going to go, we're a value of 5, and then that parameter we projected to be at 10 at some later date, we're taking 7.5, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we're basically assuming that there's going to be a linear growth rate across all of the years, and we're basically saying, well, we're not going the full 25 years that we went previously. We're only going 5 years of that, assuming a linear growth.
When will we ever come back and like, take not interpolated data, but like new fresh data, I guess?
Yeah, we are actually, the timing is a little bit unfortunate, but it's actually on our work plan right now, and we are on the schedule to actually update the entire model. We have to do it every so often, about every 7 years for a region. So we will be updating that data basically as soon as we run the analysis for this long-range transportation plan, but the new model won't be developed in time to use for this LRTP.
So this is kind of like an interim sort
Correct.
of holding pattern or whatever.
Correct.
Well, I certainly would not have to.
Did I miss the rationale for why the traffic analysis zones need to be updated? What, you said they need to be updated so often, so it just is this just tweaking because over time these can alter, or is there some?
Yeah, so there are a couple of reasons. One of them is like to meet federal requirements. There are actual federal requirements for establishing the TAZs, and one of those is that they have to align with existing census blocks. So what happens is between the decennial censuses, the census blocks change. But the other thing is that there could be a new traffic generator that pops up in one of these TAZs that might cause you to want to break these out a little bit differently. Yeah. What's that? Yeah, exactly.
Or a new improvement, like a new interchange that's improved, would that change the?
I don't know if the interchange, I think it's based on more like what would generate trips, not on the transportation system. Although, Sean and Ren, correct me if I'm wrong, if there's like a new interchange or a new improvement, the boundary has to align with the roadway, correct? Yeah. Yeah.
So the 29 solutions are already embedded in which the data you have. It's been 10 years or 7 years.
The 29 solutions are going to be operational improvements, but okay, so that is actually related to the assumptions that are in the model itself, not the TAZs. But the 29 solutions, I believe, are not actually, the improvements are not actually going to be captured in the model because they are not major capacity improvement projects. So the model won't necessarily reflect the impacts of the 29 solutions bundle. Things that would be reflected are things like major capacity increasing. So adding 2 lanes to 250 to increase it from 4 to 6 lanes, or yeah, a roadway extension that provides a new connection, something like that.
Hey, Sandy,
Yes.
the 29 solutions projects are going to be included as network improvements. Those would be in the base year conditions because they're already completed and underway. So
Okay.
the 4 laning of 29 north of the river would be in there, and adding Berkmar would be in there. Hillsdale extension would be in there. The new interchange project at 64, that's going to be added. That would be one of the new ones that we would add. It's not really changing because it's a point location, but the ramp configurations changed a little bit. So technically it's not really going to change any of the analysis, but it will be included in the model update.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
So from 5 years ago, the updated socioeconomic data would be, all right, these 3 major developments have come online. So that was part of what they updated.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
This school has been built, that's been updated. This employer has come into the area, set up shop. So when you say the locality's updated, that's the type of stuff you're talking about.
Correct. Correct.
Got it.
Okay, so at this point, we're looking for a motion from us, or as a resolution to approve the use of the socioeconomic data as prepared and presented by staff. Is there more that you want to say about this, or?
Not unless you all have questions.
So moved.
Second. All right, all in favor?
I
Aye. That was simple enough.
I tell you, that data chart, that was some compelling stuff. I thought we were gonna go line by line there, or column by column, rather.
You certainly are within your right to do that if you so choose.
All right, next item up, smart scale. So Sandy, you're gonna provide an update on the smart scale discussions that occurred at the latest CTD meetings. You're gonna give an updated list of projects.
Yeah, so I'm gonna, again, try to go through this really high level. There was some new information related to economic development, so we're gonna spend a little bit more time on that. But the first thing I wanna do is go back and provide you all with some updates based on some revisions that hadn't been made to previously identified recommendations for revisions. So the first one is related to the application caps. As you recall, basically there was a recommendation to reduce the number of applications for all localities, and the CTB and the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment staff did receive a lot of feedback on that recommendation. And one of the things that they heard is that there could be a justification for adding a mid-tier or middle range of projects. So there were some localities who said, you know, we're not like these big major metro areas, but we're also not these smaller areas. And so there was a request to add a mid-range. And so there was a revised staff recommendation from OIPI that was presented, I think, in October, at the October meeting. I'm gonna get what happened in October and September a little bit conflated, I think. Yeah.
These numbers are people?
These numbers are people. So based on the population, the revised recommendation from the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment staff would be for the smallest entities, so for localities with a population of less than 100,000, or regional bodies, which include MPOs, PDCs, and transit agencies with an overall population of less than 250,000, instead of reducing the application limit to 2, they would reduce it to 3. And then they would be adding this mid-tier right here. The mid-tier only affects within our region, Albemarle County and Jaunt as regional entities. So for Albemarle County and Jaunt, they would actually be able to maintain their application number of 4 applications. And then the larger localities would experience a reduction to 6. So that is a revised recommendation that was developed by OIP staff. So instead of 2 applications, most of the entities within our region would have 3, except for Albemarle County, which would get 4, and Jaunt as well. So the other thing I want to go back and review is that there has been this discussion about providing better definition for what should qualify as an eligible project through the high priority program. And remember, these are the projects that MPOs and PDCs and transit agencies are only eligible to apply for projects through the high priority program. So there was this original list of 6 different project types, and they added 2 additional project types to this list: transit transfer stations and new bridges. And this would also include new bicycle and pedestrian bridges, not just new roadway bridges. So part of the reason they did this was because it aligns with the tiering process that they use for the economic development scores. And we'll talk a little bit like this, but this does expand the types of projects that the MPO would be eligible to submit for as far as smart scale applications. All right, so based on this and based on reviewing some of the priority projects that have been discussed at the locality level as well, what this means is that this is basically the list of projects that the MPO would potentially be eligible to submit based on that revision to the definition. So if that application limit is reduced to 3 for the MPO and the PDC, we would have a total of 6 projects that we could submit between the 2. And out of the projects that have been discussed throughout our region at this point, these are the projects that would miss the definition that are kind of queued up at this point. There's, we haven't discussed this at the MPO, but it has been identified at least tentatively by Albemarle County as a high priority project, and that's the diverging diamond interchange at I-64 and 5th Street. We've been talking about the Ravenna River Bike Ped Bridge, and I realize that maybe there is some question about whether or not the MPO might want to support the Hillsdale South Extension project, but that would be an eligible project through that the MPO could submit. And then there are also projects that could potentially be queued up through the VDOT pipeline project. So I did want to mention just briefly, we can discuss these projects very high level at this point if you all would like to, but I did want to at least mention this DDI project, because if there is interest in general support in at least considering this project, for a round 6 project application. There is some additional work that would need to be done to develop this project for an application by VDOT. And so they would like an indication that there is interested in pursuing this project, at least generally, not necessarily as a commitment. Any initial feedback or question or comments?
I mean, that's not the last transportation priorities conversation we had in the county. We weren't getting to project specifics. We were more process conversation. So that would have to, at least from Ann and I's perspective, have to be probably come out of our transportation priorities conversation. What type of timing would that mean?
I think we're looking to, try to do some traffic analysis and stuff that we require on that. In fairly short order of time.
Like this year?
Application.
This year, early next year?
Like next month, December.
It just takes a lot to get these applications to the point that they're ready.
Especially with an interchange, you have to look at.
I get it, and I'm not even making commentary on it. It's just we haven't discussed this as a board in Albemarle County.
And I don't know if the information that VDOT might be generating is what's needed before we can really discuss it in the development
Right.
anyway. So if that's the case, then I would say yes, please. And since I saw it for the first time just yesterday, I've done all the way to Wakefield. I went, is this what we're talking about?
Yeah, with the success going on at 124 from the saving of it, I mean, I doubt there'd be opposition. It just, we'd be, I guess that's why we're here though. Right?
It's smart scale, so this is.
I lost track of your prioritization stuff, but I thought this ranked pretty highly on the supplemental board last month.
It probably did, but the conversation at that time was more around the process to eventually land on what those numbers are going to be
The actual numbers.
than the actual projects. Yeah.
We were admonished not to go specific.
Yeah, because we love going specific to projects, but we weren't allowed to.
Do you want to add anything, Jessica, or do you have anything in addition to add? Sorry, not to put you on the spot.
No, I mean, if there's any questions, it was ranked as the #1 project in our prioritization, but as you guys mentioned, we're not stuck with those particular numbers. With the feedback that we got, we do want to revisit the exact project prioritization numbers. So that might not stay the same. However, the reason it was scored so highly in the first round is because there's a lot of development that has recently been in there and is going in. So we anticipate that it will score at least in the top 4 when we go back and revisit that prioritization process.
I can't imagine the board would be objectable to be able to object. So you needed that guidance today.
I think we were hoping just to get a general, correct me if I'm wrong for the VDOT folks, but I think you were hoping to get a general sense that there is at least tentatively support to move this project forward and interest in seeing it remain as a potential project for round 6, correct?
Yes.
And staff's expecting that?
Sorry, say that again.
And staff's expecting us to do it?
To do what? Sorry, I missed the first word.
To give them the go-ahead. It sounds like they're looking for some.
Yes.
Because I mean, what we're saying is this, in this conversation, that would be a project that would be applied for by the MPO, that would need support from the localities, but
You
it
need
would
more
come up in the project selection process, conversation that might just happen with you all directly. Because you all would submit the application.
Sounds like we'd be in agreement with that then.
So do you need us to vote on this?
I don't think so. No.
Well, from the city's perspective, if this is something we all think is important, I support it.
Well, it certainly impacts your city residents, no question about getting to the highway, I mean, public safety stuff and fire and everything, the access. The fact that nothing moved yesterday for quite a while, because everybody was trying to go south on 5th and then east on 64, and it was like lockdown city over there.
Yeah, we got an email from somebody complaining, well, a resident just lit us up about congestion issues around, and he did, I quote, said, the new interchange at 124 is the only thing working properly. So you get some kudos from somebody.
That's funny.
Any feedback?
I think that's right. Of course, frankly.
Sandy, can I weigh in 1 minute? The reason I asked Sandy to add this to the meeting, just it's the time it's going to take to do the study. It's going to be elongated because of the new regulations that we have to do regarding interchange improvements on 64. and we've got to involve the feds, and there's a lot of public outreach that we've got to do that. We didn't do a lot of it with the Fifth Street study. We just said, yeah, this needs to be studied more in the future. We need to include some pedestrian bicycle facilities on the bridge to get across, because right now there's very limited. But to do that study, it's going to take a lot of time. And that's why I want to try to get started on it as soon as possible so that we can get it ready if you guys do want to submit it in the spring for Smart Scale.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, I think you're hearing yes.
Great, thank you all. So now back to smart scale economic development updates. So to start talking about, this is going to be a little bit more technical than some of the other updates, because what they're talking about with the economic development conversation is really changing the scoring methodology pretty substantively. So I'm going to explain a little bit about how they currently evaluate or determine economic development benefits of projects in smart scale. And then we'll talk about their recommendations for how they're proposing we could determine the economic development benefits through smart scale. The first thing I want to just make sure is clear from the beginning is that one of the things that that is intended through the economic development scoring measure is they want to be supporting new economic development projects, not existing commercial development. So there continues to be an emphasis on projects that will provide incentives for new development activities. The current economic development evaluation includes 3 different scoring measures. There's this project support for economic development. That's the biggest scoring measure. That's the one we're going to talk about. There are 2 other measures. One of them is related to intermodal access and efficiency, which is really about measuring freight movement and freight access. That one is not, that there is an adjustment to the second scoring measure, but that change isn't actually going to impact project outcomes. So I do want to make sure you know that there is a change to measuring the freight impact based on freight volume versus how it was previously measured, which is on freight tonnage, but it's not going to have an impact. But what they did is OIP staff worked with the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, and Virginia Economic Development Partnership made some recommendations to adjust the way that economic development is being measured through Smart Scale to better reflect sort of how the state assesses the impacts of new economic development. The current way that we do this, that they get this information, is actually very manual in nature. And so basically the staff, your locality staff, the MPO staff actually uploads site plan information into the Smart Scale application. That information is validated by VDOT and OIP, and I don't know if DRPT validates economic development sites, but probably everybody that touches Smart Scale does something with the economic development evaluation. And then based on how big or how intensive a transportation improvement project is, that defines a buffer for how many projects, what the buffer is for the number of projects that can be captured in the economic development score. So if you look at these tier 3 projects, these are big projects, your big capacity improvement projects, your new bridges, your new transit stations, those are tier 3 projects. Those are going to have the biggest buffer of 3 miles. And so remember a couple slides ago, we talked about adding those additional definitions or project types eligibility for the high priority program. Those are based on aligning with what is considered these tier 3 projects in the economic development scoring measure. So big projects can capture economic development sites within the 3-mile buffer. Smaller projects like new bike lanes would only have a half-mile buffer. So they'd be capturing a smaller buffer area of economic development. So that's just reflected here. If it's a big project, your circle is bigger. Smaller projects, your circle is smaller. So some of the criticisms that have been identified related to the current economic development scoring methodology is that it is the only scoring criteria that requires the applicants to upload information into the database. So it's very manual and it does take a lot of time. And then the other concerns are that it doesn't address the best, what's considered best in class economic development impacts that are being assessed by the state. And largely the state is interested in supporting projects or industries that add to the gross state product, that have economic impacts like job creation or capital investment, and are interested in supporting projects that demonstrate a high level of market demand. And so those are some of the factors that VEDP is recommending try to be captured in these economic development methodology. So first of all, they want to capture the potential of a economic development site in terms of generating new jobs and in terms of generating capital investment into the site, because those are basically metrics that are important to localities and help localities generate new revenue, as well as the state generate new revenue. They want to capture market demand by adding in a site visit factor. So basically, once you get to a point where an industry is interested in visiting a site because they've shortlisted it and they've done a national evaluation to determine where they might be interested in siting their business, that's been through a pretty significant evaluation process. And so the number of site visits that a property experiences is a good indicator of the market demand. They want to consider how much funding has already been invested into the site through a number of different state and I think national or regional programs, things like Go Virginia, the tobacco fund. If there are other state programs that have already invested money into that site, that's going to give additional benefit points to a site in terms of its economic development benefits through Smart Scale. And then there's also a factor to account for site readiness. So how much infrastructure has already been placed on site? So what level is somebody ready to move in versus additional preparation that might need to go into preparing the site for a business to locate there? So those are all factors that they want to be part of this new economic development measurement. What they are recommending is that in order to consider all of these different new factors is instead of having applicants upload all of these individual site plan information, they want to pull in information from a statewide database known as Virginia Scan. What this means for us in this room is that only sites that are identified in the Virginia Scan database would basically contribute to the economic development score. So it would be really important that all the localities are working with their economic development directors to ensure that any site that is eligible to be entered into the Virginia Scan database is entered into the Virginia Scan database. Unfortunately, I do not have a lot of information on what's eligible to be entered into the Virginia Scan database, so that's probably a conversation that you all would want to have with your economic development offices if this change goes through. So this just shows kind of a breakdown of how this new score would be established. I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but basically they can use the characteristics of the sites that are entered in through the Virginia Scan database to determine how well it aligns with the characteristics of other sites in terms of estimating how much potential job growth a site is likely to support and how much capital investment a site is likely to support. So using historic outcomes based on characteristics that are similar to properties that are entered into Virginia Scan will help them predict what likely outcomes might be for the measures that they're interested in evaluating. And then I just wanted to show that this is what is entered currently for our region in the Virginia Scan database. So I don't know, those of you that have done Smart Scale in our region probably know that probably at some points we have uploaded 30 or 40 different site plans for certain projects. So this is something that we would want to take a close look at and make sure is accurate as far as what possibly could be accurate in our region does get uploaded into this database.
Is this the first time you've ever seen a kind of linkage at this level between the economic development side of the house and like the traffic side of the house?
For Smart Scale, yes, definitely.
Because it makes some sense. It forces
relationship, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, in a formal relationship, yes. I mean, it's always been sort of implied. I mean, they talk about a site down there, go to the industrial park, always, please to be organized in the state to rank this transportation projects when they're there. So implicitly, it was always picked up before, but this is more explicit. And I think, in some respects, I know in Charlottesville, a lot of the point you're getting from like mixed-use buildings, you have some commercial on the bottom floor, and then you have a bunch of residential. You got to count all that square footage. That's what I think this time around you won't do that. So that is a major switch in this.
Interesting.
So they just went through the OIP staff. They've been very conscientious to demonstrate that these are illustrative examples of outcomes based on if everybody submitted the same projects in round 6 that they submitted in round 5 under these changes. But you will see that there are projects that increase in score because in some cases there are major sites that weren't necessarily uploaded by locality staff because they maybe didn't have the capacity or just were unaware of certain sites. But then there are also projects that decrease in score as well. So there are going to be outcomes, and unfortunately, I don't have enough information to necessarily predict what those would be for our region explicitly. But I do want to make it clear that this could have potential implications for our region in terms of how many points we are getting or what kinds of economic development benefits are being reflected in our project scores overall. So I just want to go through a couple of really high-level things, and then we can come back to the economic development piece as we have this conversation. But I provided with you all a summary of a discussion we had at the MPO Technical Advisory Committee. And one of the reasons I want to make sure that we are conveying any of the discussions that are happening at all these different levels is because based on the last Commonwealth Transportation Board meeting, there are a lot of items that are still up for discussion. And so if there are preferences or if you have a desire to sort of make a statement on a preference between different scenarios, there certainly are some discussions among the CTB where you could state what kinds of scenarios you might want to support. First of all, from the MPO Tech Committee, if you consider all of the wholesale proposed changes together, there is generally concern that these do not reflect locally and regionally identified priorities. There was concern about the reduction in the number of applications, but obviously since then there's been a change to that, and so the revision to the application caps that were proposed by the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment staff could help address that concern. There are concerns that the revision to the economic development scoring methodology combined with removing the land use score as a standalone scoring measure would disproportionately benefit projects that are in proximity to those new large-scale economic development sites while reducing the importance or the value of projects that maybe support smaller scale or infill economic development and also provide needed connections for existing residents. And then also some concern that, I think I just covered the last point in that second point. At the CTB meeting, these were some of the items that have been discussed, and so I just want to mention this to you all. There was a lot of question among the CTB members about the economic development methodology and whether or not that would adequately capture the benefits for all parts of the state and all types of economic development, specifically that infill and smaller scale economic development. There was also an alternative that was proposed to the reallocation of the land use weighting factor if it's converted to a multiplier. So the recommendation from the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment staff was to take the points that would be allocated to land use and apply those to a combination of safety and congestion mitigation. There's an alternative proposal from the CTB members to reallocate those land use points to a combination of safety and accessibility. And what I did was I put handouts for our project scores from rounds 4 and 5 for our projects at each of your seats. So this shows you where the points are coming from for our region across all of those different factor areas, in case that helps you sort of understand whether or not we might have a preference between putting points towards congestion mitigation versus accessibility. And then there was also one recommendation by a CTB member to, in addition to the other projects that were added to the high priority project eligibility list, to also add some sort of consideration for bundled corridor projects. So where you have multiple projects that maybe one of them isn't a big project, but you have multiple smaller projects that are intended to work together. There was some discussion about whether or not that might be an appropriate addition to the high priority program eligibility list. So just thinking specifically about the land use scoring factor reallocation, I did run some back of the napkin scenarios on this. So there are differences in scoring and what's likely to be funded in our region based on these different, whether you put 5 points towards congestion mitigation versus another 5 points to accessibility. That does make a difference for what the anticipated outcomes could be for our region. So the allocation of the land use points might benefit to the combination of accessibility and safety are likely to benefit the same types of projects that we submitted in round 5, but reallocation of the scoring factor to congestion mitigation versus accessibility would provide greater benefits to those larger scale roadway or capacity improvement projects. So I ran this scenario, and what it looks like is that under, there are limitations of this. This is just intended to give you an indication of what the outcomes would be. But basically reallocating to safety and congestion mitigation as recommended by the Office of Intermodal Staff, if everybody submitted the same projects they submitted in round 5, basically there wouldn't have been projects that were funded in our district grant program. However, the caveat with that is that this 250 Peter Jefferson Parkway intersection improvement project, if it was submitted by one of the localities and was eligible for the district grant program, it would have scored well enough to be funded through the district grant program. However, if we reallocated those points to a combination of safety and accessibility, it looks like the Ravenna River Bicycle and Pedestrian Bridge would have been funded, the Belvedere Boulevard project would have remained funded, and then if District Avenue and Peter Jefferson Parkway 250 improvements had been submitted through the district grant program, they likely would have also scored well enough to be funded.
So the X factor though, or the caution, I guess, I mean, this is yes, we have to do this analysis, we have to understand this. But the one thing that is different is that when we submitted those projects, the existing projects, we knew the game and the rules. Mm-hmm. So when you do a cross the line comparison and say, well, this would have been funded, wouldn't be funded, that's true, but for the subjective nature of how you applied for the funding. So, because I see in the tech committee and other folks that have already given public comment at our board, that this is just the level of analysis, is that this is going to be a huge change in what we get or don't get. But both are not taking into account that we submit projects based on how they score, and that's not captured in that analysis. So it has to be cautioned when we bring this up.
So you're exactly right, and I think that's why there has been reluctance from OEP staff and the Secretary's office to provide out this ranking based on past grants, because it's not a 1-for-1. The way the game is, the way the scoring is done, you're going to submit projects in order to be successful for what that scoring is.
So like Belvedere, we would submit that under some new set of criteria. You would take all of that new set and go, well, all right, this is a big project for us. Not saying Belvedere is the biggest project for us, but the way you would submit that and how the tactic or the strategy to get it funded would change than how it was done under the old criteria.
And which category are we putting it?
Right. So this is why walkability, bike ped, these things that remain important to both Charlottesville and Albemarle, the prioritization of that's not going to change. We'll stay committed to that. How we submit to get that infrastructure will change, but it doesn't necessarily mean we are going to be any less successful in getting them funded.
And maybe with funding or what funding type of project you put it for, it may not be smart scale. Maybe it's revenue sharing that you use.
Right.
I think the question about all of this is are these the projects we want to have funded? And is there a preference for where the scoring is? Because there does seem to be some opportunity that not everything is settled, that there are discussions that are happening at the CTP right now. So if there's preference from among you, this is an opportunity where that preference could be shared and could potentially support the outcomes, but I would defer to you all on whether or not you wanted to take any make any formal recommendations or provide any formal input.
Well, it seems like the option 3 for the tiering of the different population sizes, that's something that I think is a good improvement that their staff made. I don't know that from the face value of it, the economic development criteria up there, I'm actually not reacting negatively to, I'm reacting favorably to. But I don't know enough yet to even
And would it
say
include
one way or
like
another.
redevelopments of locations? I mean,
What's that?
It's gonna,
the economic development, is it like greenfield sites, or would it also include like redevelopment?
Well, I think if there's a question or if there's something that's important to you about economic development, we could also either ask questions ahead of time, or we could also state that that's an important consideration if they make changes to the economic development factors.
Yeah, just looking at the time, and I don't want to rush this, but I'm wondering, so there was a memo prepared by the MPO Tech.
Well, it was prepared by staff on behalf of MPO Tech, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Would it be worth just sort of summarizing what that contains and how that aligns with what we just said? I mean, is it?
For what purpose?
Well, for voting on it.
What's that?
That's what she went over on those. She already went through that.
yeah, I don't think I'm not ready to say one way or the other yet. That I want.
Everything you've been through is what was summarized in that.
Mm-hmm. Correct, yeah.
I mean, I'm ready to take their into consideration, but I also want my own understanding to be clear before I start taking recommendations. They may be further along in their understanding of it than I am, but I'm not ready to. And thank you, because the economic development explanation there was well done. So that's just where I'm at.
Could you go back one slide?
I will mention that there is a town hall that is being planned for October 31st. I do not think that our policy board is meeting again before the comment period closes, though. I think that's going through mid-November. If we need to have a special meeting, we could certainly do that, though.
And at this point, the CTB intends to take action the first week of December on these changes. That could change based on the discussion that was had at the meeting last week. But
They were talking about maybe potentially having a November meeting when they don't have one scheduled.
Could you go back to the current?
The last one, that one.
these different alternative.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I'm struggling here. So what you've given us here is a summary of that 2-page or 3-page document that you emailed out to us.
This is the summary right here. This is the summary of that document right there.
I mean, I think.
You have concerns with that, man?
I mean, I don't know enough about, on bullet 3, I don't know if I can agree with that or not, because I don't have enough information to agree with that or not. But if you go back to the 3 points that Sandy had there, the application caps by the staff recommendation, I think we'd all be supportive of that. That helps us. That doesn't cut us back as far as it did prior. The second bullet point is the one that I'm still not sure about. And any feedback I'd be giving on the changes economic development methodology would be my initial reactions to what I just heard here without further consideration. So it's just a matter of going, generally speaking, I think those could be areas of concern, but if you put me on the spot right now to explain why I would or would not support bullet 2 or 3, I don't know that I could provide that rationale as a board member. And I get a little uncomfortable voting on things if I can't explain why I voted that way.
And I'm certainly not in a position to go to a town hall with CTV and say anything about any of these, because there may be, and I don't know, but guidance at the CTV level that says we really want to push toward the governor's priority on mega sites and that kind of thing. We don't have any of those. But there's really very little point in my mind in going down there and whining about how we don't have any of those, because, that's, so I really want to know what the rules are, and then we work to figure out what we have in our due list that qualifies for something, if anything.
It sounds like part of what you're asking is input on what the rules should be.
Well, these are the items that were major topics of discussion at the CTV meeting. So I think these are the places where there's potentially not consensus among them. where there would be opportunity to provide some feedback that would be considered.
I think what I can say is thus far with the public feedback and some of the concerns and fears that are being expressed, I'm not as fearful and as concerned, and I may regret making that statement publicly down the road, but it's just a matter of what I said when that table was presented. Yes, this project might not be funded under a bare bones just analysis of the scoring points, but it doesn't take into fact that if the scoring existed 3 years ago, that project may not have been submitted that way. So that's the part that is why I'm not as the sky is falling here, because it's going to mean, and I have faith in our staff that they're going to go, oh, okay, well, this is how we submit projects under the new criteria. And they'll be making strong recommendations to us of how to get that funding done. And then we work with the PDC and the city in trying to figure out who best submits them and who can under the new rules. Overall, if less projects are getting, there ain't nobody's projects getting done if they just don't at some point put a cap on what can be accepted. There's not enough money for all of them. So
it does seem like, I mean, I hear what you're saying, that makes a lot of sense. It does seem like the sense of the MPO Tech Committee was that the sorts of projects that we have tended to prefer, which are the smaller, more sort of multimodal sorts of projects, will have less chance of getting those.
But that's based on the rules that were planned.
but I mean, also we've taken,
As opposed to the district ones.
and we've also had really big projects that didn't get done as big projects because they were too expensive, that now we've done piecemeal and we still can't get done. Hydraulic 29 is a perfect example of that. Under these new rules, that might get done as one big project, and we were advised to break that out. So now we're doing, well, we got the District Avenue, we got the Hillsdale South is one thing, we got the bridge going is another. I mean, there's what, at least 4 or 5 of that, and there's still another 3 or 4 to go to get that whole project done. And under the new rules, the whole project might have just been done, bam, all one thing, and all that construction would have been done at one time.
So what do you need from us? Do we need to?
This is only if you all want to issue any sort of formalized feedback. I just need direction from you all. If you're saying that if you all are saying that we do not have feedback that we want to provide at this point, then I don't need anything from you.
Any more information coming from anywhere before the town hall first? Okay, so we have to take what we want.
Yeah.
Sounds like we're still gonna wait and see.
And the CDB is not even aligned, but they're not aligned. It's not like they came out and said, this is it.
So we feel like it's premature to.
It's supposed to be a vote in December.
I mean, but the application caps, I mean, that's a win for us. So that's the only thing I would be like, for sure, would say, yeah, that's a good idea. And then that alleviates one of the concerns in the tech letter, because it was about reduction of applications. Well, that's clear. That would be a good thing for us.
Did you hear that?
I'm sorry.
Ned is suggesting we bullet number 1, we ask them to convey that on.
For the
Yeah.
alternative proposal from one of the CTV members.
So just on that one, comment on that one factor and
increasing the application.
Yeah. Okay. I'll be happy to do that.
Is that all for item 7?
Yeah, and I know that we are short on time. I do not think there's anything else that we need to cover on the agenda today. So if you all need to go ahead and adjourn, we can.
Was Mr. Scarpinato, is he here?
Yes.
Oh, hi, how are you, sir?
How are you?
Is this something you can do pretty quickly, or we should?
Yeah, it's just a few bullet points.
Okay, go for it.
So the TJPDC was awarded a $1.1 million grant earlier this year to develop a comprehensive safety action plan for the region and its localities. This plan will identify opportunities to improve safety on the roadways by reducing and eliminating serious injuries and fatalities. So we entered under contract with Kinley Warren and Avcor last month and had our kickoff meeting with them. They are a consultant team for this project, where we aligned on project administration, discussed branding, and generally got underway on this project. And they are currently developing a detailed project work plan, schedule, and public community engagement plan. VDOT presented to your locality staff on some preliminary data analysis that they have been working on for roadway safety. And locality staff provided feedback on areas of additional interest where they want more analysis in the future. That analysis will feed into the development of the plan ultimately. And one other thing I want to highlight is we are working to schedule a regional safety summit for either December or January. We are currently not sure exactly when that will be planned, but it will engage with elected officials and executive leadership and other participants from the 4 E's of traffic safety. So just keep an eye out for that. We don't know when it will be scheduled yet, but we're working on it hopefully very soon.
Great, thank you very much. So the safe streets and roads for all project will end up with a list of recommendations, I guess?
Yes, it will also allow each locality to, it'll set up each locality to have one application for a project implementation application that they can apply for at the end of this plan. So you'll be set up good to go on at least one project in each locality, where you can apply immediately to whatever grant makes sense for that project and get hopefully some funding to actually produce something.
Fantastic. Thank you. The next meeting will be the combined November and December meeting on December 5th. Questions about that? And then I guess roundtable updates. I may have to bail on this. Can we just go quickly around the room?
Sure, we've got a lot of paint in the city going down the streets. We're also scoping out work for the winter in terms of planning, looking at a restriping plan for West Main, road dive on 5th Street, and we're looking at comprehensive parking strategy. In the past, we've only looked at downtown when we study parking. Now we're going to look at the whole city and see how our permit system is working. We need to expand our permit zones and change our permit program in general. So we're looking at that as well. Excellent.
Yeah, county staff are in the middle of a lot of big and little projects, including the comp plan update and our transportation priorities. One thing I want to bring to your attention is that we will be presenting to the Board of Supervisors on the 1st about smart scale changes and how staff expect the proposed changes to impact our priorities.
Sir? I would just tell you the pipeline project should move along pretty well through 3 phases. First phase is the final problem, sort of wrap our arms around what the universal solutions are. We're wrapping that up. We had a very productive meeting this past Monday with a lot of your constituents in the county along the Ivy corridor that I think went very well. We've taken a broad swipe of the possibilities could be out there and trying to rank them whether or not they are viable or not viable or something we should sort of, in the middle. And I think that was well received by the citizens. That was very in-depth review. So I think we're moving well on that process. Excellent.
Councilor Pinkston, if you need to leave for your city meeting, I think, Ann, are you the vice chair?
I think you are.
Am I the vice chair?
Adjourn us whenever you're ready.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. It's nice to see you all.
Go resume. And the list, I don't know if you got the list of calls here, or just keep going around the room, I suppose. I hit that side.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, last chance. Anybody
DRPT, do you have any updates? No?
Anybody online?
There we go. Anybody online wants to say anything?
Yeah, well, nothing from CTAC at this point.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So I've got 2 things. With the exit 107 parking ride, we're looking at trying to get a public hearing scheduled for that sometime the 1st of the year. And CTV approved at their meeting last week the locality sustainment model for localities in the LAP program. So essentially, they're going to be able to measure performance of localities and how they're doing diminishing their program. And if you are not diminishing your program, well, based on those metrics that are defined, you have to have a performance plan put forward, and it will be presented to the CTV, and you can be potentially withheld funds or not be able to apply for projects if you end up on that list.
What was that again?
Don't go to the no-no chicken.
You said the
It's
name.
a policy that establishes metrics as pertains to the locally administered program, and it's called the Locality Sustained Performance Program.
Sustained.
So they're going to measure on-time performance for past and current active projects, reasonable progress on meeting projects schedules, and the fiscal accountability measuring reasonable expenditure of available allocation that you have. So,
Got it.
yes. Don't get up, don't be on the naughty list.
If you don't mind, I'm trying to be quick. So the other thing we are working on, we're rolling out smart scale, round 6. We've been visiting all localities in the district and trying to gather what projects they're interested in doing and which ones the VDOT can help them develop concept plans and ask school systems. Part of why this DDI thing is came up on the radar.
Got it.
And that's where it's going to give us a
Awesome. Cool. Anybody else? I think we're done.
All right. Without objection, we will adjourn.
Right at 6, good job.
Look at that, you brought it in on time, man. That's
No, well, she may have it, I just have not been able to.